and the local currency is the strongest it's been against the US dollar since April this year. And the reason is those United States elections which we're watching, and is of course causing the dollar to weaken. But there are some more movements on the global markets in anticipation of the final outcome. And joining me now is Deon Gouws, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Credo Wealth. Deon, many thanks for your time this evening. Let's start with that weaker dollar. I think during his presidency, Donald Trump constantly called for a weaker dollar in the US, and now it looks like if things go according to what we're seeing, Biden might be the one to benefit from that call he's made for years.
Yes, that is true, but I think one shouldn't read too much into, the very short-term movements of a few hours, of a few days. I think at the moment, perhaps what you're seeing is slight uncertainty. Uncertainty always leads to volatility in the short term. So time will tell in terms of how this really plays out over time. But certainly the dollar has been strong against a number of currencies, and I think from an export point of view, the US can do with a little bit of dollar weakness.
Right, and of course market participants in watching the US election are also watching the US's response to COVID-19, as well as that stimulus package that was supposed to be introduced to the economy. That also added quite a bit of uncertainty, didn't it?
It did indeed, and I fully expect a stimulus package to be announced should Biden be the winner. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump himself announces the stimulus package, if he happens to be the winner. We can debate the likelihood of either party winning it, but ultimately I think a lot of what was said and done in the last few weeks really played down to politics. It was all election positioning, and I think whoever wins, I think will have to deal with the reality of coping in this COVID world and with this very strong second wave in the US. And as far as I'm concerned, the stimulus package is very likely to be part of that.
Right. And what does this election mean for emerging markets, the risk sentiment that we have been seeing over the last few weeks, and perhaps that we can anticipate to see when those results start coming in?
Well, I think, if there's a positive election result, and by positive election result, I'm not even focusing on which candidate wins. I'm simply suggesting that an emphatic victory either way will be a strong result. What markets don't want is to see uncertainty, is for the result to be contested, for this to take days, if not weeks. If any of those things happen, if it's a contested result, I think we'll have a so-called risk-off scenario. I think we can expect not only volatility but market weakness. And when such situations arise, typically emerging markets suffer more than most. So I think if there's a strong result, let's assume that Biden wins, as the polls suggest. I think we'll have risk on. I think it will be good for markets across the board, including emerging markets.
Right. Deon, how much of that risk-off sentiment that you've just spoken about would also be impacted by the COVID-19, the resurgence in the US and Europe, and really the failure to deal with it adequately? And here the failure, I talk about the Trump administration.
No, I think that's an excellent question. I think if you look at the recent weakness, just to put it in perspective, the S&P 500 was essentially at an all-time high as recently as 2 months ago, the beginning of September. Since then, the S&P has shed about 5%. And frankly, most of that happened in the last few weeks. And as far as I'm concerned, it's mostly a function of the COVID issue rather than the election. The prevalence of COVID in the last few weeks, I'm sitting here in London, has certainly been stronger than what most people forecast, and markets are frightened by that. Markets are frightened by the economic impact. We now realize that a lot of the stocks that people want to invest in that depend on the world functioning in an old-fashioned, normal sort of way are simply going to take longer before they come into their own again. So I think a lot of the recent and current risk-off scenario that we've seen has been a function of COVID more than the election.
Brilliant. Deon Gouws, Chief Investment Officer, giving us insights on the global markets and how they are moving about because of the elections in the United States.